What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Above My Pay Grade. I'm back with Matt from Citizen Earned and Ramblings with an Immigrant. I guess this is it's the third time we've talked. Episode 2, though. Last time we ended on, we had a lot of comments about Matt's naivete. They said, hey, this guy needs to read a book because he doesn't understand conspiracy theories. And keep in mind, I like talking to Matt for a lot of reasons, but one of them is we don't agree on everything. And one of the things that I think is important when you're chatting with people is actually getting their true thoughts on why they believe what they believe. But last time we talked, we were talking about conspiracy theories. And Matt, your take on conspiracy theories were essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're a bit of a waste of time because they're a distraction from what you can truly do to change your own life. They're an escape.
Yeah,
you might say.
Yeah.
Did I summarize your thoughts on conspiracy theories?
Absolutely. When we go back to, I think it was episode 1, now I can't remember, and the principle of resource management and the 3 resources that you have that any human being has control over: time, money, and calories. And we look at those calories and where you're going to put that energy in those calories. I think conspiracy theories is an entertaining place to put your calories, but they're not very productive. It's not going to yield many results. That's why I choose not to believe in them, because I understand there's some weird things that happen. And it's easy to read between the lines. And when you ask a question and you don't get an answer, or you get multiple different answers, or you get one answer now and then you get an answer later, or a different answer later, like we experienced during COVID, it's easy to ascribe, to take a logical leap, and provide an explanation for something without verifying that answer. And then we label it a conspiracy theory and say this is what it was. But we haven't actually accomplished anything with those calories. We've assigned the answer to this problem, to this conspiracy theory, in the form of this conspiracy theory. So we haven't really done anything. So when it comes to investing our calories or our time into either explaining a conspiracy theory or being a good father, being a good husband, bringing a positive attitude to work, those types of things, we would be better off and we would have a better life if we invested the calories in the tangible, real things of our lives. The conspiracy theory very well might be true, right?
Yes.
But we're so small. If we're not a president and we're not a leader, or like, you and me, we're so tiny, we can't really do anything. You'd be better off like getting an extra job as a pizza delivery person and buying some more food stores and ammo to be ready if something were to happen than you would to spend hours and hours and hours on the internet trying to find answers to things and perpetuating the conspiracy theory.
So this is something I've always often thought about, because I'm kind of an information junkie. Probably a lot of people who watch this channel are too. Maybe that's not a good thing. And I agree with you. Like if your life is focused outside your home and inside your home is falling apart, your priorities are wrong.
Pardon us, folks.
I muted this.
There we go.
When I look at conspiracies and being involved in politics, if you don't pay attention and you don't see what's going on, I can't remember who said it, but you'll be ruled by your inferiors. Like if you're just a person who's kind of apathetic towards the goings on of the world and who's ruling you, and that's kind of the nature of politics. It's shared. That's what politics is. It's like, what do we agree on is morality, and then who's going to enforce that with a gun? Essentially, that's what it boils down to. And if you're kind of head in the sand, which I don't think you're arguing, but I'll give you an example. And I agree with you that if you don't, if your own house isn't in order, probably shouldn't worry about other people's houses, right? But I'll give you 2 examples that have affected me that I would say are you might say are conspiracies, or they're at least lies. Okay. The invasion of Iraq, the GWAT era of war, and that is playing out now with Israel and Gaza, because no matter what, it's such a polarized conflict, number one. And number two, everyone in America now feels like they're lied to about going to war, because the United States is in perpetual war. So what that lie and or conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, led to was people in the military like you and I deploying to far off nations in an effort to protect the United States citizens over a lie. And some people would say the same thing happened with Gulf Tonkin and in Vietnam. And so that directly affected me. That was a conspiracy, I would say. And then recently, the conspiracy, and I know you wanted to kind of flesh this out. I am not, and I have to couch my words in this, because everyone says you're anti-vax. If you're in the military, you can't be anti-vax because you get injected. But one thing that really bothered me, well, there's two things. When my hackle started to go up, when I started to question what was going on with the vaccine, was they didn't take natural immunity into account, which could be a scientific reason. I don't know, but they didn't give me one, and they refused to, and they said they're not taking that into account. And no scientist, but I know that typically natural immunity is better, and that you don't have to get a vaccine unless it's a therapy, meaning like you get it every year, like the flu vaccine. But that's not how they're selling it. And then number two, it was illegal for them to force you to get an emergency use authorization vaccine. That is illegal. And that sets a precedent that is so dark, I don't even want to get into how dark that can get. If they can force you to get something that's emergency use, meaning you have the person that produces it has no culpability or liability. So they're forcing you to get it, and then they're like, if there's consequences, sorry, you had a choice. No, you didn't have a choice.
I don't know the answer to this, but to interject real quick, do you know if that's different, if that law applies differently, if it's a draft army versus if it's a volunteer army?
No, because that came into, I believe, quote me on this, during it was the GWAT, because they came out with anthrax, and that was not FDA approved. And they did a whole court case. I think it went to the Supreme Court because they were trying to force military members to get the anthrax shot that was not FDA approved. And it came out that you cannot force people to get emergency use authorization vaccines for obvious reasons, and for good reasons. And then all of a sudden was waived. Now, I'm not going to, I've heard anecdotal evidence. I know friends, I know personal people personally who have been affected by this. They have myocarditis, etc. That, you can call it a conspiracy, you can call it stupidity, you can call it whatever you want. But if you were a person who's just not paying attention and only assume that your betters or your political leaders are following the Constitution and following the law because, hey, they're in the government. Remember, the Constitution was written not for you and me, but to keep the government in check, not to keep you and me in check. And so, yeah, so that's why I think it's super important to know your rights and know what, like, if it doesn't pass the giggle check for you, meaning if you feel suspicious about something, you may not know the answer, but you should get answers. And if they don't answer that, you don't even have to call it whatever you want,
right?
But they're not being honest.
And that's essentially what Citizen Earned is about, is showing people and teaching people how to get those answers, right? I say that the Bill of Rights is the citizen's task. So the First Amendment obviously is freedom of speech and assembly and religion, and essentially it articulates the right to get access to the information. People are going to push to have access to the information, whether they're allowed to by the state or not. If they get a satisfactory answer, then they will take that answer. If they don't get a satisfactory answer, we end up in the place of conspiracy theories, because they're trying to find an explanation and trying to make sense of something. so on down the line with the Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment is there to give the First Amendment teeth, blah, 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 etc. To come back to conspiracy theories, I think as English being my second language, the majority of the issues and the divide that we have in this country, we can solve by the proper application of English and simply sticking to the definitions of words, which that's a whole nother topic that we can discuss at some point with people changing definitions of words and things. But for now, a criminal conspiracy is a conspiracy is an agreement between two or more persons to commit a crime at some time in the future. To commit a crime at some time in the future. Or conspiracy is a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful, right? So that, by definition, that's why I don't believe in conspiracies, because at some point down the line, somebody, somewhere in the small group is going to fold. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to justify conspiracy theories and lose sight of the overall picture of what they should do with themselves. So if we kind of work down each quote unquote conspiracy theory that we've talked about, Iraq, COVID, so on and such forth. For me, if we use COVID-19 as, maybe I shouldn't say that, maybe YouTube's going to flag that, but if we use that as an example, and you look at, and I think I covered this last time as well, if you look at the response from the leaders, the people who are in charge, and their responsibility to make a call on a policy to protect as many Americans as possible. You don't know where this virus came from. You don't know who made it. What you are seeing in the science early on is that it mutates 4 times as fast as a regular SARS-V2 flu virus. That's not natural. That's weird. On top of that, never before have you seen the lingering effects of the virus mutating a person's individual mucus, the stuff that keeps your lungs clean, right? When you breathe something in and it gets stuck in your lungs, that mucus is going to gravitate toward those things and you're going to cough it up. Excuse me.
Unintended.
Speaking of coughing, I'm still sick. I'm still working through that, right? So the cilia and all of the little hairs in your lungs are going to move that mucus up. Well, with the COVID virus mucus, that stuff wraps around the smallest air sacs in your lungs. Aren't they called like areoli or something? Alveoli.
I knew that. I was going to guess that.
Alveoli. Sorry, I got confused between tiny little air sacs and nipples. You can edit that out. Or not.
Not going to do that.
But alveoli. So the virus changes your mucus into wrapping the alveoli in a permanent barrier. So with alpha variant COVID-19, that's why even putting people on ventilators didn't work. Because even though you were putting air into their lungs, the air couldn't transfer from the lung air sac into the blood vessels on the backside, right? And if you had a third of your lungs encapsulated in this permanent membrane, you would essentially be drowning in your own mucus and you wouldn't be able to get any air into your bloodstream. Why they didn't push that information after these studies, like why Fauci or whoever didn't share this information, didn't cite the sources to the people. I think sometimes the people in government assume that people are dumber than they are. And people are, more often than not, which you'll find if you travel, at least in the United States, is that people are nicer and better than you think they are, and that they're smarter than you think that they are.
Unless they're in government.
I don't know why that concentration happens that way, but yeah, right?
Because the incentives are broken. But
right. So Alpha did that, and you and I know people who lost people to COVID. I mean, shoot, dude. When people talk about the conspiracy theory of COVID-19, it really gets me going, because Here in the States, where we have a fantastic medical system, and no, it's not perfect, but we have all of the technology and we're able to get people to care, few people lost loved ones. In my extended family, back in South Africa, we lost 36 people because they didn't have care. Because that country isn't run in such a way where they have a reliable electrical grid. So the hospitals don't have power. And their COVID numbers aren't even known because they don't have enough of a government to be able to trust the numbers that they're reporting. So here in the States, it was rough and it was difficult, and it's easy to like second guess the decisions that the government made, but still a lot of people were saved. And you and I know a guy there at our unit whose mom was lost to it, right?
Yeah.
So it did affect people very real. In a very real way, it affected a lot of people with Alpha, and then again Delta, and none of the other variants were nearly as lethal. So why the government couldn't measure their response based off of the data they were seeing, I don't know. And I'm not defending the government's decisions either, because they messed up a whole bunch of things, right?
Right.
And we didn't know these things until way after the fact, and we could read the studies and see the statistics and all of this stuff. But
yeah, I mean, you kind of did. Like, that's the thing that bothers me. Like, most people aren't going to argue that it's completely fake. The conspiracy is that an opportunity arose. By the way, where did this come from? U.S. funded research overseas, even though that was that you weren't even allowed to say that, conspiracy number one. And because
now we have confirmation of that.
Yeah, because it came from a pangolin in a wet market, whatever. But two, that the people, I guess it was a wake-up call that the people's motivation, that's really ultimately what it comes down to. You're going to make mistakes as a leader, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to make calls. And in the government, again, the Constitution is written to control the government, not you and me. If the Constitution can be, and I think there's a lot of people in power who don't like the Constitution, can be either delay, pause, whatever, because of an emergency, the emergency will produce itself. And what a lot of people realize, including me, and this was kind of a wake-up call, maybe I was wrong, maybe I was naive to ever think this was true, but the people in government don't actually have your and the country's best interest in mind. So when they're making a call, it is, how do I grab more power? How do I get richer? Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because when you say the government, or we saved a lot of people, government had very little to do with that. And maybe I would say it was the hospitals, and a lot of people would say the ventilators killed more people than COVID, or that type of treatment. And then the government shut down dissenting opinions that were correct, right?
Right.
So you got to ask yourself, and I don't like to impugn motive because that's a total guess. But at the end of the day, you look at, like, are you doing something illegal, like forcing people in the military to get an EUA vaccine? Your motivation could be pure as the driven snow. I don't care. You force people to get an emergency use authorization vaccine that has side effects. It's just facts. Right. It has side effects. And then those side effects, you have no repercussion because, hey, guess what? The fact that you took an emergency use authorization vaccine means you were signing on to any type of side effect because you took an emergency use authorization vaccine. It means it hasn't been tested for side effects and long-term effects. But you weren't given a choice. You were forced to take it, and now people are backpedaling, et cetera, et cetera. And that just leads to such a dark place where, most people think it was real and bad and all this kind of stuff, and it can affect people. But it kind of opened up the kimono and showed how disgustingly dark some of the motivations in Washington are. And when it came to the medical side of it, I'm a big believer that a lot of, number one, you were kind of threatened. Like if you decided to give alternative therapies, you could lose your medical license. So if you are a person who, and just like in the military, if you understand what the motivation and the way the tide's going, the way the school of fish is swimming, if you decide to swim with the school of fish and the whole school of fish is wrong, you don't get in trouble. But if you decide,
but you're going to get eaten.
yes, well, no, that's what I'm saying. Like if you're with a whole group of people and they're all wrong, you can't get singled out. But if the whole group of people is wrong and you decide to take a chance and say, hey, they're wrong, and you end up being wrong, right? You take a chance by putting your reputation on the line and saying, hey, this therapy doesn't work or whatever, and you are wrong, you will probably lose your medical license. So a lot of people don't want to take that risk, even though they don't feel too certain about what's going on in the narrative. They don't want to take the risk, the reputational risk of being wrong, because if they're wrong in the group, they won't get singled out. But if they're wrong by themselves, they will. And that, I think, is a fundamental human motivation. Like you could not agree with it, whatever, but hey, the whole group is doing it, so I won't get singled out. So I don't necessarily think conspiracies have to be like somebody meeting in a room full of cigars and talking about X, Y, and Z. It's their interests. If you have a group of people and their interests align, money, power, whatever.
It's like an unspoken conspiracy.
Keeping your job. Like a lot of people got the vaccine not because they wanted to feed their family. That's not a conspiracy. That's a fact. Like people were coerced, especially in the military, to get the vaccine. Who knows if there was a room full, but they broke the law to do that. That's also true. So,
and see, that's where I think that our disagreement kicks in, because I'm going to say that's not a conspiracy based off of definition. I'm going to say that that's ineptitude. It's selfishness. It's being power hungry. And the reason that delineation is important to me is because if you have a conspiracy, now you're making the people in Washington, your leaders or whoever, an enemy. If it's just ineptitude, they're just dumb. If they're selfish, then they're just another human being. And we, as the constituents, need to keep them accountable. So
I guess, we'll see how much accountability happens.
So
I'm guessing zero.
So if we keep them accountable, now we have agency, right? So that's why I choose to believe in the human condition over conspiracy theories, because it allows me, or my mental framework, an ability, recourse, some actions left. If it's a conspiracy theory, these people are so powerful and they pulled this thing off, they pulled the wool over our eyes. We never had any way to limit that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think that
Does that make sense?
Yes. And there's a theory out there. A lot of people say there's this cabal of leaders who are so powerful that run the world and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, if that's true, then why are you even talking about it? Because if they're that powerful, then what's the point?
That's right.
But I guess I point this out because you do have agency. You had agency to not take the vaccine. You had agency to use your mental faculties to say, hey, wait a second, I don't know if this is safe or not. It could be not, but you're telling me it is, and you've done 3.5 minutes of studying on it, and for sure you don't know the long-term effects because
right.
You've been doing 3.5 minutes. So you can call it whatever you want. All I'm getting at is when your leaders who are tasked, who swear an oath to, I don't know, the Constitution of the United States, don't protect that. And that's ultimately, I guess the long pole in the tent is what I'm trying to get to is not just complaining on this show and podcast. Like there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, and I agree with you. Like, what's the action step you can take today instead of worrying about what they whoever they are doing? What's the action step you can take today? But one of the things that, like the long pole in the tent I was talking about, is the incentives in our system are broken. And so when you incentivized, and we were talking before you started recording, let's just say murder was legal. It was wrong morally, but in the United States, it was legal. Do we have the law that it's illegal to murder because people naturally don't want to, or naturally are violent? I think it's because human beings are naturally sinful, and they're prone to do sinful things, retribution, yada yada. So murder is illegal. The incentive is if you decide to take somebody else's life, you're going to go to jail the rest of your life or get the death penalty. If that was not the case, I think we would have far more murders, etc., and any other crime you want to commit. Where I think that changes is and this is why I focus on economics, is most people, including you and I, this is one thing I being a guy who talks about interrogation, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how human beings react in bad situations. We're all capable of evil.
Terrible things.
But it's the people who think somehow they're altruistic and they're the hero of their own movie that are the worst, because they don't even see it coming. They don't say it. Can't see them reacting that way, but themselves reacting that way. But what I'm getting at is I drew this up and I showed Matt this before we started recording, and I've done a podcast on this before, but when I say incentives, what I'm mainly talking about is there's this scene in The Big Short that is one of my favorite scenes in a movie because it hits home. It's Steve Carell's character, and he's talking to this group of people in a room, and he says, "It's not that fraud is mean or not nice. It's that before it was never profitable, and it was always in check. So if you decide to commit fraud, if you decide to cheat, it's not going to profit you in the long run. That was the incentive, not to commit fraud. Today, the incentive is to commit fraud because it will reward you in the long run." And I'll give you an example. 2000, what the movie's about. 2008, banks were running out and not necessarily committing fraud, but taking way too much risk. And now that the Federal Reserve has their back, like if you take this much risk and it comes up empty, you're not going to go bankrupt. We'll just print money to make you whole. And that's what inspired Occupy Wall Street, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at this, I made Uncle Sam's budget, and this is for every citizen in the United States. This isn't.
So just to be clear here, if I'm reading this correctly, what you've put together here is on the income. This is what every person pays in taxes.
Yeah, divided by citizens. So some people pay more, some people pay zero. But if there's 330 million people in the United States, and these are all approximate numbers, but this is about how much the U.S. government takes in per citizen in taxes.
So that's man, woman, and child.
Yep.
Okay.
13,984.
Okay.
And then this is what we spend. So you got to think to yourself, if we're spending, again, these are all divided numbers, $3,938 on defense. And you have all these interests. Everyone has an interest in all these. Big one being health, Medicaid, Social Security is in there, $4,475. That leads you to $3,915 per year per citizen that we're overspending.
So that's putting each man, woman, and child in debt of over $3,000.
Yeah,
every
almost $4,000.
year.
Yes, and that's
Wow.
I'll tell you, there's lowball numbers because interest, all this stuff is adjusted for inflation. So, and then you got to take into account, one of the things I say all the time is, if they're trying to reduce inflation, what they're actually trying to do is induce a recession, meaning so you spend less money, but the government doesn't spend less when they take in less in taxes. They spend the same amount. So that paycheck is actually going to go down, and the number at the bottom, income minus expenses, is going to go up because all the expenses are going to remain the same.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. The government's expenses are going to stay the same. I, as an individual, as a citizen, I work. Out of that work, I pay a certain portion of taxes. back to the government. That's the
Mhm.
income for the government. But the government continues to spend, and what they're spending for me individually is $4,000 per year more than I pay them. They're
Yes.
also spending $4,000 per year for my child who's not
Mhm.
paying taxes in.
Well,
And if I have,
they're spending 17,899 for your child.
right. Thank you. Thank you for the correction.
Yeah.
And if I have another child, that's another 17. And if I have another child, that's another 17.
Yeah.
So essentially, and then to cover that, they're printing more money, or the Fed is increasing the number of numbers that they're loaning or transferring to the banks. And the US, the government is exchanging bonds for those numbers that the Fed is putting into the banks, and then the banks are loaning it out to smaller banks, and those banks are loaning it out to smaller banks, and those banks are loaning it out to people.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what that means, the summary here is, at the end of the entire chain, my child, who is born or unborn, is going $18,000 in debt every year without them even getting anything from it.
Ish. Yeah. They're still spending that 17,000, but like I said, the 13,984, they're taking in from like some rich guy or whatever from. So even though you may not pay those taxes, so they're going in debt about 4,000 a year per citizen. So yes, but they're spending 1789.99 per citizen. Yeah, but some that's subtracted, or 13,000 subtracted from that. So, but my point is, if you have an incentive-based system where, and I said this the other day, if your municipal government wants to, and I'll get rid of this here, if your municipal government wants to fund a project, bridge, road, whatever, the way they do that is they go into debt. They take a loan out, and they normally sell a bond, and all that is a debt contract, because your municipal government does not have the ability to print money, unlike the federal government. So when they sell this bond, you go into a debt contract, if you decide to buy one, with the municipal government. And the other risk of municipal governments, think of Detroit, they can go bankrupt. So you want to be compensated for that risk and duration, however long you give them the loan, etc. When you do that with the federal government, they, technically can go bankrupt. They already are, in dollar terms, but they can just go deeper and deeper and deeper
Into
and
debt.
deeper into debt. And the release valve for that deeper into debt is your currency. And so you, a guy who goes to work for his family, you're spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week away from your family so you can earn money to feed them. You are spending your time, energy, and effort, and you talk about calories, right?
Yep.
You're spending your calories and energy to do a thing for a purpose, but that's to earn green pieces of paper or units on a screen.
Mhm.
And those units on a screen are being printed. So essentially your labor is being debased at a faster rate than you could ever earn money,
Right.
unless you hit the lotto or whatever. So what I think that leads to, number one, that's broken. That's a totally broken incentive system, because the incentive is, as a politician, is never to say no. Because in your own life, you have, and this is why I think it leads to really bad decisions, whether you want to call them, like we were talking about with COVID, whether that's intentional or unintentional, it leads to really bad decisions, because it gives you option B, which is print money, which is never really an option because it debases the currency. But in your own life, you have to go, all right, I take in this much money. I want to go on vacation. I want to do this. I want to do that. So I can't do this. That's what you have to say. The government never makes that decision. And that's why I said, when there's a recession, and a recession means people don't have jobs. Because if you lost your job tomorrow, you're not paying taxes, and now you're taking more from the government with unemployment. So they're not spending the money you were supposed to pay in taxes. They're not spending more money because more people are on unemployment. So their spending doesn't go down when tax receipts go down, like yours would. When your income goes down, your spending goes down. And what this leads to is, if you study history, the worst disenfranchisements of society and the breakdown, because I look at money, all money is, price is the language of supply and demand. That's all price is, right?
Mhm.
So when we pretend that one side of every transaction can just be made up, which is money, it's when I exchange money for your time, energy, effort, or good or service. The money side of it is so made up. It's not like I look at money as like a ruler. If you're trying to build a house or a measuring tape, and every time you roll out that measuring tape, an inch changes what an actual inch is. Your house is going to look pretty weird, right? Probably not be structurally sound. If every time you pull out the ruler of money, the value of it's changing, right? It's worth more, it's worth less. Worth more, it's worth less. But in the long, it's worth way less. How do you ever write contracts? How do you trust your neighbor, et cetera, et cetera? So what's your take on that? Like that's why I
Well,
focus on money.
it turns into a downward spiral. So you want to talk about conspiracy theories to wrap this all up. I don't think that this is a conspiracy theory. I don't think this is a group of people trying to commit, a small group of people trying to commit and put into place a plan to commit harmful or illegal acts.
Yeah,
I think this is
kind of the inception of the Fed, but go on.
We can talk about zeitgeist and all of that. Anyway, I think it's extreme ineptitude and people in power that don't know what's going on. I think, dare I say this? An easy example for that would be the mayor of Chicago, or literally any anti-gunner. Anyway, that's a side story that we could talk about later. I think it's ineptitude. I think it's gross ineptitude and ignorance, and the people in power that don't understand how the systems of control in our life work. I also think we might have to pause here for a second.
No problem. He's on kid duty, folks.
Just to cut out that timestamp. Gross ineptitude. Here's a conspiracy theory for you. The way that the world is headed, there's a book, Empty Planet, by two Canadian demographers, and I forgot their names. But essentially what they say is in 1700, the world population was 300 million. That's currently less than the US population. In 1800, it was 400 million. In 1900, it was 1 billion. And in 2000, it was 8 billion. The only organism on this planet that grows at that rate is a virus. No, I'm not trying to talk anti-human or say anything bad. What I'm saying is that when you have a population growth along that curve, there's no way to have the consequences of that growth be sustainable. So the pendulum is swinging further and further. It's swinging higher and higher and higher, right?
Yeah.
We see that, I believe, in climate change. We see that in economy. We see that in war. So when it comes to looking at all of this stuff, at the end of the day, if people aren't preparing, if they're not ready, I don't necessarily like to use the term prepper because it's got such a bad connotation and tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists and like all of this other stuff. But if you just look at the demographics, things are getting rough. Wealth is being concentrated more and more in a smaller and smaller group. What is it? 4% of American men say they think about the Roman Empire every day. Some people are reading their history. Some people, few people, are seeing that we're making the same mistakes as before. On a geopolitical war map, China and Russia are doing some very interesting things that we're seeing culminate now in Israel. We haven't necessarily, you and I haven't necessarily talked about that, but from all of the things that I'm seeing, I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization created, funded, and pushed by the Russians as another proxy war to keep the U.S. engrossed in another conflict in the Middle East.
We fund it too. Maybe indirectly, maybe
There you
not
go.
intentionally, but we fund it too.
And all of that stuff that we left in Afghanistan, I'm sure is fighting its way over there, which is frustrating. And so now we're distracted with this stuff in the Middle East. Israel is front one, or Ukraine is front one. Israel is front two, all in all, because of the collusion between Russia and China, because China wants Taiwan. Why does China want Taiwan? Because all of our chips, our electronic chips, come from Taiwan. And if China can own Taiwan, they can own all of the digital sphere in the US, or the supply chain to be able to run that. No more new iPhones for the average consumer. No new upgraded chips for our warplanes, bombs, any of that stuff. It kind of neuters us in our war capability. So that's the three-front war that I see. If you want to talk conspiracy theories, this is the real threat. Add to that our defense spending, our incentives, and our leaders being ignorant or power hungry, or whatever you want to call it up there, and they continue to spend, debase our money. And at the end of the day, as we track it, the way you said, our energy, right? Our calories. My calories are worth less than they were 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I have to work more and more and more to make the same amount of money, or the same amount of value.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to what I originally said, which is, instead of trying to spend all the time to understand the conspiracy theories and really find the reasons or the answers, that's not a terrible thing to do. But if that's the only thing that a person is doing, that's not the best allocation of resources. What each individual person has to do is to run the citizen's task. First Amendment, yes. Get to the information. If you can't get to the information in a reasonable time, fall back on what you know is going to work. The Second Amendment, which isn't just guns and ammo. Skills, fitness, and food stores, water purification, backup generator. Like, things are going to get rough. I'm sorry. But that's just the reality. And if people want to be an ostrich with their head in the sand, then that's fine. But you're going to suffer, or you're going to suffer one way or the other.
Yeah. No, I being a survival instructor, I think people need to be a little bit more, self-sustained. I'll leave you with this. I think, if you trace back why all of our chips are made in Taiwan, it's because we got rid of all manufacturing in the United States. Why did we get rid of all manufacturing in the United States? Because we couldn't afford to export anything, because the dollar was the most powerful currency. Why is that? Because we have the world reserve currency. So it comes back to money to me every single time. And when we're talking about what you can do about it, same thing with the wars going on in Israel, Gaza, all that kind of stuff. Regardless of your opinion on it, on should we give money, should we not? If you had a balanced checkbook, if you gave money to Ukraine, then you have to take it from somewhere else. But we never do that. The way they tax you, and this without your vote, is they debase the currency. So just like the war in Afghanistan, if you had a debit on your W-2 and said war in Afghanistan for 20 years, you'd be like, hey, what the heck are we doing over there? That's how it happens, kind of under your nose. And the reason people are starting to pay attention is the pain of those decisions over 3 decades are coming out, and of debasing the currency, People can't afford a home, etc. But Washington's going to continue to do it at an accelerated pace, and this is why I'm such a big believer. Like, you have to fix the incentives, therefore you have to fix the money. You have to fix the money, therefore they have a checkbook that's balanced. Therefore, they have to make a decision, A or B. They can't pick both and just print. They have to pick A or B, and it gives the citizens more power, because for them to pick both A and B, they have to tax you more, which leads to citizens going, hey, wait a second, what are you spending this money on? But since they just print it, I don't think people hold them accountable as much. But my opinion, and study history, this doesn't end well, as you said. And I think, I hope that people do have, like, people who listen to this kind of stuff understand that I do think the biggest impact they can make is with their family. Like, the strongest citizen statement you can make, I guess, or best citizen thing you can do is raise good kids. Be a part of your community. When we're talking about conspiracy theories, you don't have to, you can't solve all the world's problems, right? You live in a certain place in the world. Try to help in that community. But if you want to be an engaged citizen and a person who helps to change the future, helps to change the incentives, I think fixing the money is a big part of that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that there's one more thing that needs to be said, because what oftentimes happens is when people talk in this line, it's like, oh, we're doomed and we're all going to die. Yeah, well, the moment that you're born, you're going to die. So that's reality. Death is a part of life. Here's the thing. We're no worse off than humans have been forever. We're just on the downslope of the roller coaster. So if you want to talk conspiracy theories, look up the ancient civilization 26,500 year theory and idea. Point being, take heart that we're no worse off than humans have ever been. Life finds a way to keep surviving. If anything, get excited, because life is going to get less and less boring day to day from here on out.
Love it. That's a good place to end it. Matt, thanks for coming on again. We'll
You just muted that last little bit.
I keep hitting that stinking mute button. We'll hopefully be doing this again next week. But yeah, Matt, thanks for coming on again. And folks, we'll see you all in the next one.
Thanks for having me.